On my brother Brandon's 20th birthday, my parents demanded I give up my trust fund. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't leave. I just smiled. My name is Sarah Calloway. I'm 28 years old, and I run a boutique interior design firm in Austin, Texas that I built from nothing. Brandon, my 20-year-old brother, is the golden child, warm, funny, genuinely lovable, and completely unaware of what our parents were planning that weekend in his name. The house smelled like birthday cake and fresh flowers when Dad called me into the living room and closed the door behind me. What she didn't know was I had been ready for this moment for 6 years. Mom spoke first. Diane Calloway, 54, is the kind of woman who wraps cruelty in a calm voice and calls it love. She explained very politely that Grandpa Walter's trust fund, my $180,000, needed to go toward Brandon's party costs and Dad's real estate venture that was quietly bleeding money. Frank Calloway, my 57-year-old father, sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight, daring me to disagree. I said no, one word, quietly. That's when Dad stood up and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. But that wasn't the worst part. Mom looked me directly in the eyes, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Your grandfather always did waste his love on the wrong child." One sentence, delivered like a fact. I felt it land somewhere deep, and I let it stay there. I drove home in complete silence. Jess Monroe, my 30-year-old best friend and business partner, was waiting on my front steps with coffee she hadn't touched. Jess is the kind of person who knows before you call. I sat in my car for 4 minutes before going inside, hands on the steering wheel, not shaking from fear, but from the specific exhaustion of being chosen last your entire life and still showing up anyway. I told Jess everything. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was truly angry. Then my phone rang. Uncle Ray Calloway, 63, Grandpa Walter's younger brother and the co-trustee of my fund, a man who communicates almost entirely in silence and paperwork. He said 4 words. I heard, "Come tomorrow morning." I stayed quiet for a reason. Uncle Ray's kitchen table had 3 folders on it before I even sat down. He is the kind of man who prepares before the problem arrives. He walked me through the trust structure, simple, clear, unbreakable. The fund was mine alone, no cosigner, no family access, no clause that allowed pressure or transfer by request, already documented, already filed. Already sealed 6 years ago. I drove home feeling something close to steady, then just called. Her voice was careful, which meant the news was bad. What she didn't know was I hadn't seen the worst move yet. Apparently, Mom had called Brandon and told him I refused to help cover his birthday because I didn't care about him. Brandon believed her. My gentle, trusting, 20-year-old brother now thought his sister had chosen money over him. Brandon showed up at my door that evening. He wasn't angry, that would have been easier. He was just quiet and confused, which broke something in me that my parents' words never could. He said, "Sarah, I didn't ask them to do this. I just need to know if any of it's true." I looked at my little brother and I made a choice. I didn't defend myself, not yet. Some truths land harder when you let them arrive on their own. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing how carefully Mom had constructed this story, brick by brick, using Brandon's love for me as the weapon. If this story is hitting close to home, you're not alone. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because the truth hasn't arrived yet, and when it does, nothing in this house will ever be the same. 2 days passed. I said nothing publicly, just handled our work. Uncle Ray made one phone call, not to my parents, not to Brandon, to a 69-year-old retired woman named Mrs. Eleanor Briggs. Eleanor had spent 22 years as the personal assistant to Grandpa Walter's accountant. Not a lawyer, not a professional of any kind anymore, just a deeply organized, fiercely loyal woman who had kept every handwritten letter, every signed instruction, every piece of personal correspondence my grandfather had ever produced. She arrived at Uncle Ray's house with a cardboard box held together by 2 rubber bands and decades of quiet devotion to a good man's wishes. I stayed quiet for a reason. Because I knew what was in that box, and my parents had no idea Eleanor Briggs even existed. Eleanor set the box on the table without drama. Inside, 14 letters, organized by date. The earliest one written the same year he set up my trust. Grandpa Walter Calloway had been a quiet man, a retired schoolteacher from Denton who drove a 2003 Ford and never once raised his voice. But he had seen something clearly that everyone else chose to ignore. Letter by letter, he had documented every time Sarah was passed over, every family decision made without her. Every birthday where Brandon got a party and Sarah got a "we're proud of you" that nobody meant. And then, at the very bottom of the box, one sealed envelope, cream-colored, my name written in his handwriting on the front. Uncle Ray placed it on the table and folded his hands. What she didn't know was Grandpa Walter had written it specifically for this moment. We called Brandon. He came alone, and when he walked in and saw Eleanor, the box, and Uncle Ray sitting like a man who had been holding something heavy for years, he went very still. Uncle Ray handed Brandon the sealed envelope and said, "Your grandfather wanted Sarah to choose who reads this." I looked at my brother and said, "You." Brandon opened it slowly. He read it silently first. Then Uncle Ray asked him to read it aloud. Brandon began. Grandpa Walter's words were simple, no drama, no accusations, just a father's clear-eyed account of what he had watched happen to his granddaughter for 20 years. Halfway through, Brandon's voice broke. He stopped, pressed his hand over his mouth. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence that followed, complete, unbroken, and entirely necessary. Mom and Dad arrived expecting a conversation. What they found was Brandon sitting across from Uncle Ray with Grandpa Walter's letter on the table between them. Frank started to speak. Uncle Ray slid a document across the table, one page, clean, already filed with the fund institution 18 months ago. I stayed quiet for a reason, because the document spoke clearly enough. Grandpa Walter had built one final clause into the trust structure, quietly, years before he passed through the fund institution directly, with no need for any courtroom, any professional, any confrontation. The clause stated simply, if any family member formally pressured Sarah to surrender the trust, a portion would automatically redirect into a separate account in Sarah's name alone. The pressure my parents applied at Brandon's birthday, documented in emails, in voicemails, in a text from Mom, had already triggered it. The account had already been funded. Brandon apologized to me 3 days later, not in a single sentence but in the way real apologies come, slowly, painfully, over coffee that went cold because neither of us wanted to stop talking. My parents have not called. I don't know if they will. What I know is this: I used to believe that staying quiet meant I was losing. Now I understand that preparation is the loudest thing a person can do. You don't have to fight every battle with your voice. Sometimes you fight it with patience, paperwork, and people who loved you before the argument even started. If someone in your life has ever been made to feel like the wrong choice, stay. Because this story is for you, and I want to hear yours in the comments below. Grandpa Walter gave me a trust fund. My parents tried to take it. He made sure they never could. They spent years making me feel like the wrong choice. Turns out, I was the only one Grandpa Walter chose twice.